Bon dia, Yiva Cordia. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Fireside Chat with Eimear. And this is our 81st, where I'm in conversation with a member of the Order of Bards, Ovids and Druids. So good evening to you here from Kilkenny, and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and maybe you're watching a recording of this chat. So as has become customary in the last number of months, I start our chat with a prayer for peace. Gomara Siocon na fud na crinne, Gomara Siocon in our Jaili agus in our Jirha, Gonari Linlan our Garmaka, Galmij Buichas Jeev, Je Chivdaka is Spirit Chivdaka. May peace prevail on earth. May peace prevail in our homes and in our countries. May our missions be accomplished. We thank you, guardian spirits and guardian deities. As the fever of day calms towards twilight, may all that is strained in us come to ease. We pray for all who have suffered violence today. May an unexpected serenity surprise them. For those who risk their lives each day for peace, may their hearts glimpse providence at the heart of history. That those who make riches from war and violence might hear in their dreams the cries of the lost. That we might see through our fear of each other a new vision to heal our fatal attraction to aggression. That those who enjoy the privilege of peace might not forget their tormented brothers and sisters. That the wolf might lie down with the lion, that our swords be beaten into plowshares, and no harm or hurt be done anywhere along the Holy Mountain. And that is from John O'Donoghue. So just let me know where you're from. Cindy from Virginia, Hampshire, Ohio, sunny Orkney. Well, it's been sunny here today. That's good too for Ballina, Killaloe, Northumberland, Montreal, Belgium. Hi, Ava. You got home safely, I see. Ava was in Glastonbury at the weekend, and Liverpool, Slough. Where else are people from? The Netherlands, France. Hi, Ferdiad. I hope you've all recovered from the gathering. Well, I am. I only got back last night from the gathering in Glastonbury, and so I'm quite I'm still tired, but still on a high from. It was an amazing weekend. We had the ceremonies, and then we had the fringe events, and it was just so lovely to have so many members together, and very, very grateful for that. So just lovely to see you, and yes. Pat Booker has gone back to Ulster. She just got back there. So it's great to see everybody. And Floriana from Berlin. Edmonton, Canada, Los Angeles. Wonderful. Chester, Massachusetts. Anyway, it's just so lovely to see you again, having been away for 2 weeks. So let me go. We're going tonight, or this morning, this afternoon, to the US. Let me introduce my guest this evening, and it's Heather Roan-Robbins. Heather, you're so welcome.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. My heart was with you all in Glastonbury. Someday my body will be too.
Oh, wonderful. So tell us where you are.
I'm in western Montana and in pretty wild territory. I live right at in the middle of the Salish Kootenai Reservation, and which is one of the larger reservations. The tribe owns 1,000,002 acres of land and keeps it all quite wild. On the other side of the mountain from the reservation is the Flathead National Forest. 30% of Montana is public lands. It's wildness and some of the largest contiguous wildland in this hemisphere. So we have that wildness all around us, and occasionally I'll see a bear walk by, and I see deer walk by daily. Right behind us are the Mission Mountains. We live at the edge of a valley, which is a nice agricultural place near the Flathead Lake. Behind us are the Mission Mountains, which go up to about 9,000, 10,000 feet, almost directly behind us. So that's great view. I used to look at mountains like that and go, oh, I can't wait to climb them. Now I look at them and go, aren't they pretty? It's it's gotten a little steeper. So, but they're pretty steep mountains. But it's lovely to live here. My mate teaches at the tribal college here, trains science teachers to teach on the reservation and to study indigenous methods of science and science education. So that's why we're here. We've been here about 5 years.
Oh, wonderful. And I know the name of the place is Ravens Ridge.
Our little area where we are 16 acres is that we are rewilding slowly is called Ravens Ridge, at the edge of Ronan, Montana. Just a few R's in there, and we're the Robins. And because this area, there is a family of ravens, and it's just been so delightful listening to them teach their babies how to fly. And you hear that there's such interesting family dynamics, the very concerned parent and the of the teenagers trying to find their way. It's really quite adorable. So they've been singing to us all the last month, and the teenagers seem to be kind of finally getting some wind under their wings.
It's wonderful. I have in my courtyard, which is enclosed, I've robins nesting, and one of their fledglings came into the house last night, and we had tried to get it out. It stayed in. I think it's gone out now, but it's just wonderful to have birds nesting around us, and then you get that little insight when they step out of where they shouldn't be and coming into the house. Now, I know some people are superstitious about birds being in the house. I always see it as a blessing.
I do too.
And obviously I was worried about this little one being trapped in the house all night. But anyway, I think it's got out, and let's hope back to its parents. But I certainly well able to fly. I had good practice around my kitchen. So you you're a very interesting person, and there's so many things that we're going to talk about tonight. Just a bit about your background and how you got into Druidry.
Okay, I would say when people ask me what spiritual path are you, I used to put all of the above. Yeah. My family was scientists. My father was an abstract mathematician. My mother was a psychiatric nurse. And they were pretty agnostic to atheistic. We went to the Unitarian Church, which was a good beginning. I went to Quaker schools. I fell in love with the High Episcopal ceremony because I loved ceremony. Then I discovered pagan ceremony. I started working with Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, Taoism, and the reclaiming tradition here in America, Starhawk's crew, early on in my 20s and 30s. And it was like a little bit of this was good, a little bit of that. This is great spiritual practice. The shamanic journey work that I trained in when I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico for over a decade. But I couldn't find anything that put them all together until I was traveling with a friend through southwestern England, had transformative experience in Avebury, found out that the mayor of Glastonbury was a Druid at the time. So I said, what do you mean a Druid? Tell me more. And I signed up the minute I got home from that trip. And I've worked my way through the Druid, the full training. So it's been wonderful.
Wow. It's just really interesting. So for you, and of course this, I suppose, reflects the diversity of the order, that you found an ability to express, or to all of those backgrounds, or spiritual backgrounds, how they inform your present spiritual practice. And you found a place.
That they all fit together. And also, I'm also, I'll give a little bit more side story on that in a minute, but I was looking for something that felt less willful than a lot of modern forms of paganism. I wanted to listen to the natural world rather than make anything particular happen. I wanted to to, it's like worshiping nature and tuning in and feeling it and centering with it, and a contemplative approach. And I was not quite feeling that where I needed it elsewhere, and found it also, in OBOD. Now, when I was living in New Mexico and working with some of the tribes there, just was learning from them, not teaching them, learning from them. I was, involved in a small shamanic study group there with Felicitas Goodman's work on postures and journey work. And I married for the second time in the spring of 2001.
Mm-hmm.
3 days after the wedding, I had been hearing, I would pick up the phone in a dream several times that year and hear a deep voice saying, "I'm sending you back to the front lines." I go, "What does that mean?" Well, 3 days after the wedding, Ren got a job offer in New York City. We moved there 3 weeks before 9/11. And that experience of walking through that journey, I thought that was the front lines. And that was a shamanic journey in and of itself, smelling burning bodies for 6 months and all the intensity of that experience. And I wanted more tools. I've been an astrologer for 40 some years. I work with all kinds of divinatory tools. We'll talk more about that.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted more tools to help my clients, and because it was overwhelming to be in New York and to be around that kind of pain. So I had to really work on my psychic perceptions to not be totally overwhelmed every time I took a subway, the sadness and the exhaustion that was just free-floating in the city. But I learned a lot. That was kind of interesting how to manage that energy. One of my mentors said, "Run a snorkel to spirit." I go, "What the heck does that mean?" She said, "No, just imagine you're on the subway, that you're pulling energy in from spirit and from the ground beneath you, and then you're exhaling it out into the subway car."
Mm-hmm.
So every subway ride became a heavy duty spiritual practice. I still have to remember that when I go back to New York. It's like, right. And when you're exhaling that out, you're not inhaling their exhaustion, and the people around you seem to begin to relax.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an interesting training. So I've heard about the interfaith seminary there. I'd heard some wonderful stories about some non-denominational ministers and rabbis, where they came from, down in the pit working with the people who were fixing the buildings or trying to find body parts on the site and trying to see what they could uncover. And they were not trained. These are construction workers. They are not trained for doing this work. And so the support teams around them were essential. And, I was so impressed by the work that these people were doing, and I wanted to know where they came from. And they came from the New Seminary for Interfaith Studies, one of the original interfaith ministries in seminaries in America. And I signed up immediately and went through their 2-year program, and then became part of their staff because I didn't want to leave afterwards. And it became, so that's also, I'm ordained through that, and began just hearing little bits about Druidry also from that, but not much to work with. But that approach of, what's the intersecting set between all paths was what I felt drawn to there. And it did give me better tools to work with people.
Oh, that is so beautiful. That is, and we've had, many of my guests here, have come from so many different traditions. And the magic is to be able to find that integration and that meeting point with Druidry and whatever it is their practice. And that is one of I suppose, the gifts of the order, is that this is the place for it, if there's any place. people often say to me, well, how can you be a Christian and a Druid? That doesn't work. And it's got to do with the individual themselves and where they allow those to intersect and meet and integrate within. Because our spiritual practice needs to come from within, not from outside of some external power source of rules and regulations, that when you own it, and I just love that, snorkeling spirit, you're in a New York in the subway, and I was there. I have been in the subway in New York, not the most pleasant of places. And that ability to work in such a magical way, both for yourself and your own centering and keeping yourself grounded. But then you say that you notice a change in the carriage.
Starts to shift the energy if you can. Not always. Sometimes it's pretty heavy, but it does seem to help, and you watch people relax around you, which is pretty lovely.
Oh, it's just beautiful.
And another reason why I was drawn to Druidry, all these threads that came together. My mate is of Native descent, Mohawk, Scottish, Irish, and Mohawk, and what we would call hillbilly here from Arkansas, that side of the family. But Ren has been on a search to understand, was not raised on the reservation and was not raised with that side open. And so we've been studying it. We left New York City after 6 years and went to work at a tribal college in North Dakota.
Okay.
And, we say you take the country, you fold it in half, you go to the Canadian border. That's where we were. It was, we would drive 10 minutes across the border and have Chinese food in Canada. That's how far north. But it was it was the Anishinaabe tribe, the Turtle Mountain. I got there and I said, North Dakota is very, very flat. And I said, Turtle Mountain, where's the Turtle Mountain? And they said, emphasis on the turtle. I was like, oh, okay. So it's little tiny hills, but because they are, the 200 feet above the flat prairie, it was a mountain in the area. But they had some really rough history. But they're fascinating tribe, and they have a really good tribal college, and they were starting a program of training science teachers for secondary, for high school. And Ren came in to help start that, and we learned so much there. It was such a humbling experience again. And we were talking a little bit before tonight about asking questions. And I was teased when I got there that my name might be she who asked too many questions.
Yeah.
And someone pulled me aside and said, in our culture, because when you're a traveling nomadic band, and they aren't traveling anymore, but the traditions are from that time. If you get into an argument with someone, it's pretty miserable. So there are strict rules. You never talk to your mother-in-law or daughter-in-law directly. Your in-laws, you can talk to the dog and ask the dog for something, and they may respond, but you have to be careful not to have that. And you never ask a question until someone else brings it up. If my grandmother is sick, you cannot ask me about my grandmother unless I bring up grandma is not feeling so well, because I may not want to talk about it. And when you live in a culture with very little physical boundaries, and in the wintertime they were very close together, boundaries are essential. So you never ask questions. I was there saying, why, no one was asking me any questions, and I was a little offended because, back east, that's how you showed an interest. They were wondering why I never talked about myself so they could ask me questions. And once I got that straightened out, I thought, oh, okay, cultural clash here. How do we find the right, I wait and I kind of notice when I can ask questions, and they would and I would start volunteering a little bit more about myself. But it was so interesting to study how to do that in a good way. They were very interested once we found a way of pacing it. And I've seen in most indigenous tribes most tribes we've worked with, that they have to believe that you will listen to them before they'll be willing to listen to you, because they've been talked at for so long. So we lived there in North Dakota on that reservation. My partner, and we'll talk, was in the process of changing genders, going from male to female as we hit North Dakota, which is not the most, trans-friendly place. But we had some stories, but in general, the tribe is very good about it, because there's traditions in most tribes for the third gender or the several other genders. So Ren found, but they still were not, they had Sundances there, and they were just getting back some of their traditions that had been nearly knocked out. But they were not comfortable having Ren sit on the women's side of the Sundance. Ren found a women's Lakota-run Sundance by a woman who had been in the Lakota tribe and danced with them. She's full-blooded Lakota, danced with them for 25 years, and then was asked to leave when she came out as a lesbian. So she started her own Sundance for women. Now it's based in Vermont. And instead of a dead tree, she said, this is a women's Sundance, so we have a living tree in the center. And there's a living tree that everybody puts their prayers on and dances.
Can I interrupt you? Sorry, I'm just interested. What is the significance of the dead tree? Is that
normally when they do a Sundance, somebody cuts down a tree, they put the tree in the center of the Sundance circle, they tie prayer ties to it, and at some point, the people that are doing the piercing will hook a hook into their skin and tied to the rope and lean back. And it's a blood offering. They said women already do blood offerings. We don't need to do that. So it's much more, but the dancing in the sun and the prayers. So her tradition has a living tree instead of a cut down tree. And so Ren has been very much a part of that. And I've been to 5 years of Sundance. And again, it's a week-long ritual. It's 3.5 days of non-stop ritual with 3 sweat lodges a day for the dancers and just 1 a day for the rest of us. But it's intense. And I loved it. It was transformative. It was powerful. And I wanted my own. I didn't feel like, I wanted to know more about my indigenous traditions. This is before I discovered OBOD. And then I said that's one of the reasons why I was searching for indigenous traditions. I learned so much from these people who have intact traditions. And I didn't feel good about taking theirs on unless I really felt called to that. But it helped me have the framework and the hunger to go find OBOD.
Wonderful. There's a question from Eimear, who's in Canada. So wonderful to hear about your partner's journey. I wonder if you ever knew of Ayana Marakle. I hope I've pronounced that. Mohawk performance artist and outspoken trans activist. She was one of the bravest, most visionary people I've ever met. Have you heard of her?
Well, no, but I will definitely look her up. That's fascinating. We've met quite a few people in the Two Spirit Society, which are that's how they refer to it in most Native traditions here, that the Two Spirit people are those who are not either male or female, but both have them living in them. But I will look her up. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Okay, so now the interesting thing, when you were talking about the men getting hooked, and the blood offering. So for the women, do they do that because if they already offer their own blood, there's no need for that, or do they do that anyway? Or
they do a very little cut. They do small flesh offerings, little slivers. and that are very carefully done if you feel called to do it. That it's not big ripping and tearing and bloody.
That's fascinating. It's fascinating. And the fact that Ren is trans has no issue because obviously she hasn't menstruated, but that's acceptable.
They take her on. They took her in as one of them. They just ask her to, carry the heavy things once in a while. But I think it's been helpful in some ways. But no, they just took her on, trained her to lead sweat lodges, and it's been wonderful for us to have each of our paths together. Sometimes we'll do ritual together, where we, where I call in the directions and Ren leads a part of it, or Ren calls in the directions and I lead a part of it. When we were in Minnesota, then we went to Minnesota for a while, from North Dakota, and their Lakota tradition is strong there, and the Anishinaabe is strong there. We got connected with Sharon Day, who is a water walker, and there's a tradition that's relatively new, but Josephine Mandamin, one of the water walkers from the Anishinaabe tribe who lives up near the Great Lakes, was so horrified at the pain of the water that she started, and she heard about the study, was it Miramoto in Japan?
Moto, yeah.
Right, where you hold water and you sing to it and you ask for forgiveness and you love it, and it changes the structure of it. So she started gathering up water in a copper container and walking it in prayer and praying for that water as she walked around the Great Lakes, as she walked around a river, as she, take it on long walks, and then sing to it and then pour it back into the water. And so there became some songs to it and traditions around it. And when we were there, many people, or a group of people, would meet by the banks of the Mississippi River, because it starts in Minnesota, and picked up, you pick up, the leader picks up the water in the copper, and we all say prayers for everything. And then we hold the water and we sing in Anishinaabe the prayer that Miramoto has for the water, and then pour it back into, everybody's passed around and we sing the prayer, and everybody prays to that water, and then we pour it back into the water and send it off to the sea. And that's such a beautiful tradition. We still do it down at our stream fairly often.
Well, Gabriella here, and Gabriella was in Glastonbury. She's in the US, and she says, I attend women's circles done in Native American traditions for moon phases. We sing the water song each time to heal the water. It's such a lovely song. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of, this is Jamie Hume. The ritual around cutting the tree is very significant. Some women do pierce. I did it 9 times. I've done both flesh offering, men and women or children. I pierced with the chokeberry sticks and eagle feathers, arms and hands. Down south is different. This was in...
Yeah, every tradition has a little bit different.
Kainai, is that Kainai? Or Kainai, I don't know. Some dances, as they were gifted, some naturalized. If they're from the Lakota, as ours was, Blackfoot territory within Alberta, Canada. It's fascinating. And then Blake says, I have a particular Indigenous friend who views our traditions as different cultural manifestations of similar roles, Druid versus medicine person or ceremonialist. He has some interesting points of view to share. He's careful not to speak for all persons, but his points are very heartening for bridge building. I think that's important because I'm always curious about other people's traditional ways, and I'm so, because my experience is not North America, but with Africa, I'm finding points of connection, because there's far more that connects us than divides us.
I agree.
And I think the more we remind ourselves of those of us who are connected to the land, wherever our landscape is, that we can be,
so beautiful.
We can meet more.
And there's, each tribe and each kind of subsection of the tribe may have different different rituals and different process. And being around it, again, how to let that teach me about my own rather than try to co-opt theirs. But it is amazingly different. This is not reconstructed, though for some of it, it came back from the brink, but it's been an intact tradition that is still living and growing, like the water ceremonies being added on to the process, which is really, really wonderful.
Absolutely. Blake says, the more we build bridges and find connections, we can gift each other things in cultural exchange and adoption in respectful ways rather than misappropriation.
Right. And I remember one Native woman did a little YouTube about what's the difference between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation. Instead of it's about me, it should include me. And, you know, that how do you make sure the funding goes right back to them, that they have the voice to speak up? How do you listen to them and center them rather than yourself? One of our friends in Minnesota is a writer. A couple of Louise Erdrich and Hyde Erdrich. Hyde had written a play about. Louise has written many books, but her younger sister Hyde, a great poet, and she had written a play about Native Americans who were part of, who were taken on a tour of the Wild West shows to England back in the 1800s. And she interspersed that with a group, stories about that with a group of American young Native people that were and so we went back and forth in time between these two groups of young people finding their way in the world. And she, the director worked very hard to have all the, and there were some non-Native cast members that were playing different roles. And they said that it was so hard, and they were very open about it, to keep the white actors out of the center. So they wanted to keep all the Native people in the center interacting with white people on the edge, because this was from their perspective out rather than how they fit into the edge of the Western culture. And the actors had such a hard time staying on the outside, and they were very funny about it. They were very clear, that was our challenge, and that's not our training, and how important it was for them to learn to center that voice, which was, I thought, really interesting and beautiful process to watch.
It's beautiful.
So it's humbling.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Sandy Coombs, you're in Tintagel, aren't you, Sandy? This is fascinating. At monthly meeting, I go to Boscastle, Cornwall. We all sit in a circle and say a wish and blessing into a bowl of water and then drink the water. And yes, she's in Tintagel, that's right.
Beautiful.
I know it's in Chalice Well. They have a water blessing ceremony every morning at 9 a.m. and I think 8 p.m. in the evening.
I think the waters of the world need it all.
Absolutely. So Ferdy, it says, paganism has often had a murky past with colonialism and appropriation, and in some places a murky present. So it's great to hear voices in our community centering Indigenous experiences and traditions without speaking for or speaking over them. I think it really shows how our Druidry can mature by overcoming Western imperialism. So. And then Gabriella says, this conversation is a lesson in clarity of communication. I will need to replay it a few times and take notes. Heather speaks so clearly, really inspiring.
Thank you.
As she says, especially on topics like this, which tend to be fuzzy. Yes. Who are heavily nuanced and very, very complex. Anne says, can you talk about the challenges to your own identity following your partner's transition? I'm on the same path with my partner. And I have met 2 other OBOD meds recently who are in a similar situation. So I think this might be really, really helpful if you're happy. I'm
happy to talk about it. We're quite open. Ren started transitioning about 20 some years ago. So, I'd say the trickiest part, and that is a good question, how is it for my identity? One of the trickiest part of having your spouse go through transition is that they hit a second puberty. They're usually taking hormones, and they're in new, and their identity is about 13 years old, as you are when you. So you have your wonderful mature spouse, and then this transient 13-year-old, 14-year-old, then 15, then 16, and sure enough, when they get about 17, 18, 19, it integrates again. But you just have to kind of like, oh, there's the teenager again, and find someone else to listen to you during that time. You know, one of the key features, I think, of adolescence is that you're not a particularly good listener. It is about you. It has to be, because you're exploring who you are. That happens when people are going through transition. So I think the spouses really need someone who they can process with out of the relationship, so they can actually be present for this. I think now I have one of the best spouses in the world,
Wonderful.
and we exchange earrings all the time. But it's, it was a journey, and I think what I've seen in so many people who have gone through transition is, if their female side, it could either way, if their female side has been suppressed by the masculine in their culture and by themselves when they were young, then when they first transition, the female side can suppress the masculine.
Okay.
And for instance, is it, can you still fix a car? And you see, I want to take the men who are becoming women out to an old-fashioned women's consciousness raising and say, get your power tools back. But it's like, you can be a woman and know how to use that screwdriver. But I've seen it happen the other way, when the F to M, that they forget how to be in touch with their feelings and how to stay empathic. But that goes only a phase. And if they can really, it's like water sloshing. If they have the room to unpack that, those two sides stop oppressing each other, and you end up with more of a multi-gendered being.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I'd say my spouse is now, a multi-gendered being with all sides showing and pretty comfortable. I had already been through the identity shift. It still affected me. That's not to say that, but I was identified as bisexual before. I've been with women. I've been with men. I said I'm bisexual but picky. So, careful with whom. And in that process, so I didn't have that identity shock that I see so many people go
Mm-hmm.
through. I thought I was straight. Well, if you're changing genders, what does that mean about me?
Yeah.
And again, it's safe to say is, science really finds that our genders are only a little shift in our chemistry. And it's our path that we chose, and the journey that we're on. I worked very hard. I'm 67, 66. I'm turning 67. That to be a woman did not mean I was limited in any way, shape, or form.
Uh-huh.
I worked very hard on that in the 60s and 70s.
Yep.
So to see people leave the gender rather than fight the fight to make that more room for themselves in the gender was hard. But that's their identity. It's something different about where their core sense of self is, and does it fit into
Mm-hmm.
the body and the projections of the people around them. I remember walking on the streets of New York, and the little group of teenagers walked by and said, "Is that a man or a woman?" I go, "Yes."
A wonderful answer.
And let them, but usually kids are good with it. They're like, "Oh, you know, so do you play baseball?" They don't get stuck on those roles. It's more, we have noticed our roles that get stuck. So I think that comes back to that identity piece. How do you come back to your own identity, whoever you're with? That that you are you. You have a spouse that's changing. You have a relationship that's in moderation. You have these attributes that are around you, but who are you?
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, coming back to that over and over again is helpful. And I think that I would okay. That reminds me of the other big change that happened in my life in the last couple of years. About 2 years ago, doing my DNA, found more Welsh and Scottish than I thought, that I always felt I had, but there it was. I also found out that the father who raised me was not my biological father, that my parents had used a donor, and that my father had trouble conceiving.
And you only
So
discovered this 2 years ago.
I only found that out at 64.
Wow. Okay.
And so, you know, if I hadn't had that experience of who am I when my spouse changes gender, and the OBOD training on working with your blood lineage and your milk lineage and how sacred both of them are, that gave me a framework that I'm seeing, now that the DNA tests are out, they say up to 6% of the people are finding their parents aren't who they thought they were. And we never thought that was going to happen, and all this information is coming out. But I think the OBOD training, that you respect the milk lineage, you respect your who fostered you, was it's so helpful to me, because I gave me an honored place for my father, even though he wasn't my biological father. He was my honored father. He was the milk lineage. And I think if I hadn't already done all that work, this would have been harder. So another pro OBOD thing.
Oh, it's great to hear that. There's a Scottish saying, the bonds of milk are stronger than the bonds of blood. And it's lovely to hear how all of that has supported you. I mean, you've had certainly different milestones to many of us, and have navigated them in such a way.
Yes.
Anne says, such a wonderfully insightful, compassionate understanding of gender. And Philippa says, people get so angry about shifting. It seems to threaten some. Surely it's about your energy and your kindness. Yeah. So it's, then Blake says, it's quite a lesson of the fact we all contain masculine and feminine, plus a good reminder we often frame certain qualities or behaviors as masculine and feminine, when really they aren't to be tied to gender at all. You know, it's we
all have Mars and Venus. As an astrologer, I can see every one of us has a Mars and has a Venus, and we have that within us. One of the things with going back to sympathizing with the spouse, though, I had to look. When I first got together with Ren had a feminine side, but was still, in masculine identity in the world. And for a while there, I was enjoying, again, heterosexual privilege. We seemed a male and female couple passing normally in the world. If the car broke down, somebody fixed it. We had the male to deal with it. And to give that up, that was more like, it was convenient. And now it's, now when we travel in the world, people see what they want to see. There was a very funny example of that. When we were back at the family farm, when Ren's parents died, they lived in eastern Montana, and we had to clear out and close up the family farm. And all the old neighbors that knew Ren as male, as Jim, came by and spoke to Ren as Jim, but couldn't understand. These are old farmers. I saw them flirting with Ren. They were just like, here, let me show you my car. Oh, did I show you this? And like kind of just like sweet old men flirting with a young woman in a kind of very, innocent way, but they didn't know why they wanted to spend time with Ren. And Ren was like, oh, that's a lovely tractor. Yes. And the people that we had hired to help this, like, get the scrap metal, we'll split this cost of the scrap metal with you. Please take these. We have 14 dead combines that need to be scrapped. They all said she and spoke to her as she, and they would be in the same room, talking to the same person, using different pronouns, and not noticing the other one.
Wow.
I thought that was really how many layers there can be, and how much of it is our own expression of it.
It's fascinating. I was at a training on trans issues, and the presenter was a trans woman who had been married and has children. And she was taking her teenage son to the doctor. So they're sitting in the consulting room, and the doctor says, "And what does mum think?" And this woman said, "No, I'm not his mother. I'm his father." And the doctor says,
Excuse me?
you're a trans woman. And she says, "Yes, but my relationship with my son is that I am his father." Right. And I've heard her a few times speak. She's just brilliant. Vanessa Lacey is her name. Talking about the complexity and the nuances, and that often people get caught up. But how I don't understand, because if it doesn't fit into this little box, and for her, and she's a great person to talk about it, because she understands the complexities and has gone through them herself. I am my children's father. I am a trans woman. I live as a woman. I have done all of these things to transition. That's how I see myself. However, I see and it's about being able to hold both. And it's a bit like an OBOD. You know, you can be a Muslim and a Druid. You could be a Christian and a Druid, whatever. Right. And it's about being able to hold. And I suppose the important thing is about how you own it for yourself. And when you can own it clearly yourself, then it's easier to share it or offer it to somebody else. I think so much of the work has to be done internally to be able to work this out. So when you are encountering questions of confusion or perhaps hostility or fear, that when you have it in here, maybe we never sort everything out within ourselves, but that if we go somewhere towards...
I agree. When we first moved to North Dakota, where it was a little, little tiny town in the middle of nowhere, fairly macho, and when Ren would walk into the hardware store and ask for a specific part in flouncy skirts, and you'd see them look a little gobsmacked, but if Ren felt comfortable, they got comfortable, and they're like, well, okay, and they would just go on with it. As long as Ren could look them straight in the eye and give them a good handshake, which is how they check you out here, and then it worked out. If I came in nervous about the interaction, then they got nervous. So I would often say, "Honey, I'll be in a minute. You go in, you get started, and I'm here backup if you need it." And I would keep my nerves, my self-consciousness for Ren out of the way until I got used to it. And then everybody that would come in about 3 minutes afterwards, and they were all doing fine, and I could back that up and support that. But I knew that my nerves, as when Ren was first transitioning in the middle of nowhere, or it felt like the middle of nowhere, was hard, wasn't helping any, and so we had to kind of find ways of. But that was my issue.
Yeah.
And that's doing the internal work. I had to kind of really get that out of the way.
Timothy says, "I wish more people were accepting of trans. So many attacks against them in the US today. We need more love, compassion, and acceptance." Absolutely. And Blake, "It's about time we recognize the validity of gender fluidity. I think this large number of fluid people have always existed, but now we're recognizing their identity and allowing expression of it." High time.
Spectrum.
And Anne says, "You have to have a good bit of humor in it." And that's so true.
True.
Yeah. It's such a joy talking to you, about this. And I think for many of our members, and not all our viewers are OBOD members, to for you to be able to share this in such an open way, I think it's a great gift to be able to hear about all of this. And that, I mean, I'm not suggesting this hasn't been hard for you, but you've come through this, and to show people that there is life through this, weaving your way with the complexities and the nuances, that everyone you can come through this.
I found that the Q OBOD page, there's a Facebook page for the queer OBOD, and they're very supportive. And if any OBOD is feeling a need of support, that OBOD group is really helpful in asking questions and working out questions around the genderedness of some of the rituals and how we're working, how to kind of reconceive it in our mind so it doesn't feel exclusive. It's more about archetypes talking, and it's been a really good group.
It is, and yes, I mean there have often been comments about the genderedness or the heteronormativity of certain of the gwers, and it's and regardless, it can have an edge for anybody, and I suppose it's there as a framework only, and it gives you an opportunity to work it out for yourself,
Right.
because all it is it's an offering. Here's a scaffolding or a framework. Now you put the flesh on it yourself and you work through that for it to make sense. And there's no one way. So how gender fluid you are, wherever you are on any spectrum, you have to make sense of it for yourself. Because there were things I found difficult, but then it's the magic of weaving your way with it to make it relevant and to have some kind of sense for yourself.
We took the May Day ritual and we took it, my seed group has just become a grove. We're very excited. Very small grove, but we've just become a grove. And but trying to find ways of reframing it so it really is, the masculine and the feminine within us, rather than the male and the female in the group. And it doesn't mean you can't act it out in the group. We loved our maypole. We did it around the living tree too. But how do you do that? Working with that, again, as an astrologer, you've got a Venus, you got a Mars. How do you let that intermarriage happen so that you're more comfortable holding that center and that equality out there in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that book, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus or whatever, and looking at qualities along gender lines, I've always found that difficult because it's like, well, I've changed tires. I'm not strong to tighten the nuts. That's simply because, or my husband did all the cooking. We shared our parenting of our children. The only thing he didn't do was breastfeed.
Wonderful.
Everything else was done. So, what's masculine and what's feminine, I have no idea. I know there's an exercise in what we do early on, what's masculine qualities and feminine qualities. I've done it. It's a really useful exercise to do. And then you throw it away because it's like, as soon as you say, well, men are aggressive and women aren't.
Yeah,
women are nurturing and men aren't. You can unpack it, but I think
they've never met a mother bear. That's how to have those. I can think of the receptives. I'm trying to rework astrology around those terms also.
Okay.
I've been an astrologer for a long time. I have a weekly article that anybody can find on my Facebook page, Heather Roan-Robbins Star Codes, and I have a deck of cards, and I mention OBOD in the little booklet that goes with that. That's about using astrological terms as oracles to help people learn how to use them without seeing that, what's the gift, what's the challenge, and what's the practical side of every single aspect and place. No good, bad aspect, no bad. So with that, I worked on finding ways of, getting the language so it's not, this is a masculine sign. I just say, I use yang and yin versus, sort of inward and outward rather than male and female, because those terms just didn't work for me. And I think a lot of, astrologers are trying to find some other way of using those words for those two poles, of which we are all of us are somewhere along that spectrum, but no one's a pure type. And how to really appreciate that fluidity. In some of the tribes out here, one of the traditions in the Lakota was, because the roles were pretty firm in the tribe because they needed people to do certain things, but you could choose which role you chose. So there would be a ceremony where at some point the child the basket and the bow were put out, which way, when the child was asked to pick one up, which one did he pick? The gathering basket or the bow? And they would be put into, are you going to be a hunter or are you going to be the gatherer? Are you going to be, and it wasn't, they trusted creation to make them the way they needed to be. So you work with who you are, not who they wanted you to be. But we still need you to do some work while you're doing that. That was the attitude.
So if you appeared male and you chose the basket, you were still seen as male, but you were a gatherer rather than a hunter.
And you might be seen as female. You might, depending upon how you chose to play that role, how strong that side was in you.
Fascinating. Wow. So Gabrielle says there's a Star Trek episode when the characters land on a planet with reversed genders, where the women are seen as strong and dominant and men are seen as soft, fashiony and sensitive, and where there were a few rebels that wanted to change those roles. That's wonderful.
There's a wonderful joke with where one of the Klingons, there's somebody who's reborn, and this rebirth of his old best Klingon friend is now female. And it's like, it's so good to see you, my old friend. He said, now I'm this. Oh, well, welcome, Jazeera. I'm so glad to see you, whatever you're in. And that was lovely. That felt very, very trans.
Susie has a question for you. Do you have any advice for me as a cis woman as I try to represent different genders and sexualities within my fiction writing? I write for a small gaming company and wish to represent as many people who might be playing the game as possible, but wish to represent people as accurately as possible as I do it.
I'd say talk to them. If you can find trans people, how would you like to be represented in a game? Let them. Most people are happy to talk to you about what their situation would be and how they would like to be seen. And so you've got a whole range of characteristics there. That's what I would suggest.
Great.
Good question. Yes.
Yeah, I suppose ask the people, and I suppose it depends on what culture you're in. You're talking about when you first went with trans people, and it's like she who asks too many questions, that you don't ask questions until it's raised.
Right.
But that'll all depend on, again, you navigate that way. Some people say,
right.
I was so glad you asked. I remember asking I can't remember what the topic was. Thank you for asking. Nobody's mentioned the elephant in the room. And I didn't like to bring it up myself in case it was going to make other people uncomfortable. Exactly. And then they're trying to not say anything. Everybody's trying to mind everybody else. So there's a dance there.
And most people on the gender spectrum don't mind being asked, what are your pronouns? Have you felt comfortable here? And I'm sure that what a wonderful question. If I write for video games, if you were in my video game, how would you like to be represented? That's a juicy question that gives them lots of room to answer without offending them.
That's right. And you can ask anyone that question, actually. Yeah. So, Mary-Lane, when my niece became my nephew, it took me 2 years to get comfortable about it. And I see myself as a very modern woman. I could not get used to his name, but after 2 years, I could feel his masculine quality, and that makes him complete and a real man.
Well, there's another piece there that I think is hardest on parents and aunts and uncles, and is when somebody transitions, it's in, and this is, again, something you process out, not process in. You don't process with the person transitioning, but you have every right to process your own feelings. If and I've walked a couple of people through when their kids transitioned, they are having a great time getting to know their son, but they're mourning their daughter.
Yeah.
Or they're mourning their son and happy to meet their daughter. It's both are true, and it's that ambiguity is that they're both there. And if they can mourn away from it and get to know the soul within in this person, it's their dreams they're letting go of. And that and that's the process that their friends can help them with. Like, how are you doing with this? What are, what are the good parts and the bad parts? And you can have some hilarious moments with with the changing genders and them exploring it, and understanding how the world sees them, which is really interesting, and noticing the supporting their soul, but you have to let go of your expectations for them, or the things you're going to do with them once, when they grew up, and there's a whole new range coming in. But it's an important part of the process, I think, if you love somebody who's changing.
Yeah, I think it's fairly. It says, yeah, I think our own process is also important,
Yes.
and I like the idea that we deal with it, but it's ours.
Yes. Yes.
And also, I think that notion of looking forward to the new son, or getting to know their new son, and allowing yourself to grieve for the loss of the daughter. And I think that's a very important piece, because acceptance is also about accepting loss, and allowing yourself the space to grieve for that. I think is really, really important.
I also felt that question around, I have a son who is born with spina bifida and pretty mild, but he will never be able to live independently. And because it's affected his cognition, and I see his whole soul, the whole psyche somewhere, just not all of it fits into this brain and this body. And I wrote an article for Touchstone when I was in the midst of my training on Carr-Gomm and her son that never got changed, because I think of this has some effect also with the trans people whose family are transitioning, and in that she did all that work year and a day to give her sons, this wonderful brilliance, and it went off to Taliesin and not to her son. How did he feel about that? And so I did some research to find out what happened to him after he didn't get the magic potion. I don't think he ever wanted it. And he went on to show up a few times in mythology as, so scary looking that his enemies ran away, and the strong, and the Slaughterbuck, I think that was what he was called. He seemed to be happy with that. So I met it, I said, help me understand. I wanted to make my son better, and I worked, and I did therapies with him, and I did this with him, and I tried that, and all of that was good, and he didn't want to be pushed as much as I wanted to push him into a normal life. He has his journey this lifetime, and that means standing back from life as I would like him to have it. Mm-hmm. And so I saw, I got from Morphin, Carr-Gomm's son, to be that what he really wanted from his mother was not a fancy potion, but was acceptance.
As he was.
And how to accept him as he was and see his divinity. I think that was her journey in that story, rather than something that needed fixing. And that was really helped me work on accepting my son and working with what he wanted to be and do, not what I wanted him to be and do. So I think that's also part of, it's easy to think about that and letting go of someone who's changing. It's easier in changing genders, there's some of that. But really that also means with our children, how do you love them and support them and give them every opportunity, but still let them tell you where they want to go?
Absolutely. And that's the thing about letting our children be who they want to be regardless. And yes. This is Ellen Mayo. I can confirm I'm a trans person, and I'd love to chat about representation.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And Ferdy, it says, I applaud your efforts to find out. It'll be appreciated by Is Caridwen the original helicopter mom? This is Ferdiad. Funny, Christopher Hughes was talking. We were talking. We did a session on Monday. I was telling the story of Finn McCool, who found the Imas through the Salmon of Knowledge, and he was telling the Queen Bach story. And of course, we talked about what happened to Afagdi afterwards, and of course, he became a great warrior and a fearsome warrior. And I did say that you had written an article in Touchstone a few years ago. So
oh, wonderful! Thank you. He's quite the character. And I, so on a secondary note, I want to talk a little bit about our little grove, our seed group that has just our second. We now have 2 of us that have finished the Druid year or in the Druid year, so we got to become a grove, and it's been very exciting. Trying to find a mix and balance between Zoom and in the bad weather, because we all live hours away from each other. So we used to do 4 weekends a year retreat, and then we would meet in a park or take a hike. Now we're doing some hikes. We have between the 8 holy days, we're taking some hikes together, so we can do it in different parts, and different parts of our little grove can gather together. But the other co-druid here is started the Stone Keepers of OBOD seed group, and it got 215 members now. It's all online, but they are people who have a relationship. She's a geologist, Brenda Ash, and so she, walking with her through Glacier National Park and hearing the stories of the rocks was just fascinating. But that group, for people who have stone circles that they work with, either out there or they've created one or have a relationship to stones, they've been aligning the stone circles with each other and just sharing that connection. And I saw a little piece on Anishinaabe language the other day that fit. The Anishinaabe, they don't use he or she for people or for articles. Everything, the only 2, it's animate or inanimate. So they have an it that is an animate it, which is probably great for trans use, and an inanimate it. But rocks are animate its. Rocks are animate. And said coming to know that changed his whole relationship to rocks and to the natural world. And I thought that fits so well with the Druid tradition.
Wow. I take it trees are also animate.
Yes.
Oh,
very much so.
Wonderful. So I'd like to talk, or for you to talk about your astrology.
Yes.
Because I know you've written books, and you just showed your deck, and I bought your book on. Well, it's a very simple book because I find all that stuff quite complex. So, but I was fascinated. I'd love to, when you wrote that your palm changes, the lines on your palm changes, and
right. I also work with palmistry for people, and that I took prints of people's hands when I was first studying it decades ago, and had proof until a flood took all those prints out that people's lines change over time. And if I saw someone suddenly deciding not to kill themselves, their lifeline might double. Or if they started drinking heavily and their whole little fine network of lines would just sort of interrupt the energy, diffuse the energy in their hands. Any major decision, as they started, the lines that, except for the major lines that cut across, all the lines that go out are about how we express our energy in the world. And if somebody isn't doing much of that, then there won't be many lines that go out that way. But if they start making an effort and using their will to engage the world in a good way, you start to see more clear lines of expression come out. There's so the book I have, Everyday Palmistry, is very simple. It was but I pared it down and pared it down and pared it down when I was teaching palmistry, so that we can go to the simple shapes and look for those in many different ways. Because if you really go for every single line, the books are this big, and it's hard to get started. This is kind of like how you interpret the lines based on the basics of the personality. If they're all fire signs, they'll tend to have a lot of wiggly lines coming out, or if they're earth signs, they may have very few. And so any line you see on an earth sign, a heavily earth hand, which is a square palm with fingers about the same length as the palm, then those lines will mean a lot, because they're not reacting to everything that goes by. So you really kind of need to know the basics of personality and palmistry before you try to get into the details of the little lines. So this is both. It just starts in on the lines. But I used to. I knew a lot of body workers and people who were counselors, and that they were, seeing people's hands all the time and were fascinated by it and wanted to know something about it. So this is not for people necessarily, though it's a good beginning for anybody. It's not designed for people who want to become palmists, but for people who might use palmistry in whatever else they do.
Okay. Gabrielle, does this mean lines are different for extroverts and introverts?
Oh, are the lines different for extroverts and introverts? What's different is you'll see, if you hold up your hands, mine are pretty even. Your first finger tends to go in on one side and it sticks out a little bit on the other.
Yeah.
Which is your active hand?
This one.
So the tending in, when the fingers go this way, it's more like I'm looking inwards.
Okay.
This is the most private part of the hand. This is the most public part. So that your pointer finger, where you reach out to the world, your fingers tend to bend in. So I would say you are comfortable with the public, and yet you have a deep, rich inner world, and people get to know the public you. Only a smaller group would get to know the personal you.
Okay.
And so you'll also look at where the heart line goes. If the heart line comes all the way across here, they're usually wild extroverts that want to know everybody. If it comes up, it doesn't quite touch up, or it comes up closer to this finger, they're very, very, very private. If it comes up between, they've got a nice balance between loving people and kind of being sort of protective of their emotions. So if it comes up in between these two fingers, it goes up into this finger. So that's also where your heart line is.
And the heart line is this one here, the top one.
Heart line starts under the little finger, and comes up over here, and the headline starts here and goes that way.
Okay. I was looking, and sometimes it's like, you're talking about, is my hand, is it round, is it square, is it, I often even get overwhelmed with the shape, but it was fascinating.
Hold up your hands. Hold up. So you've got a nice, I would say, level-headed hands. They're square-ish, but they're more rounded at the bottom, and they're rounded at the top. There's no square line, so it's practical and sociable at the same time. So it's I would find a nice balance between those two.
Okay, thank you. As Blake says, because I thought they are round at the bottom, is it? But they seem square at the sides. And I thought, I'm going to go mad with this. Anyway, Ruben says, this is fascinating. It fits. I just looked at my own hand. Accurate. Well done.
I have another book called Moon Wisdom, which is, again, it's about astrology. It's about your moon, working with the moon sign. Both the moon sign on the calendar, like today, the moon's in Libra, we're having a great conversation, or in your own natal chart. What sign is the moon? What aspects does it make? What phase is it in? And how you can use that, because the moon sign talks about how to work with somebody. That's their emotional inner prime directive. And if you know their moon sign, you know you know how to make them feel at home, and you understand their emotional language, and you know when to be insulted and when not, and how to play with them sometimes. So I found that that's one of the easiest ways for people to start going more in depth in astrology. So that's why I wrote that book.
Just somebody said, can you link have you got a link to your book so I can put that in?
You can go to roanrobbins.com, ROANROBBINS.com.
OANRO.
BBINS, and that has my books on there, and it has
Roanrobbins.com. Okay,
right.
I've just put that up. Yeah.
And it has a link to my weekly article, or you can find me on Facebook or medium.com or wemoon.ws.
Great. That's lovely. So that's you have something, you do a podcast, and you also do Astrological Weather Weekly. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, every Monday night, I do on Blog Talk Radio a podcast with two other astrologers. And sometimes we're all three on, sometimes it's just one or two of us, but all three get together. These are astrologers I used to work with all the time in New York. We have three different approaches, and we love riffing off each other and talking. So we spend 15 minutes talking about the astrology of the moment and how that's reflected in the politics and the headlines. And then we take callers. And so we do 15 minutes applying those transits to somebody's question. One or two people we get per show. And so that's Monday nights, Blog Talk Radio. It's called Access Astrology. And I've been writing an article. I started in the Santa Fe, New Mexican about 30 years ago, writing a weekly, you know, I would say astrological weather. It's not about the weather, it's about the astrological conditions of the week. And so I'll write, you know, a few paragraphs on what's basically going on in the astrological weather of the day, of the week, and then a little bit on each day. I do a shorter version of it for the newspaper in New Mexico that's still printing it every Friday for 30 years. And then the longer form appears on several websites, mine and a few others, medium.com, wemoon. And it's, yeah, I just find that it's so helpful to for people to, you know, the term disaster is disaster. It's against the stars. I'd rather they constellate. I'd rather they work with the stars. And that if you know that Mars is square Uranus and the moon's in Scorpio, you might not want to go see your ex. That's not a good day for, you know, a custody battle. But
Okay.
if, you know, there are good expressions of that energy. How do you use it wisely? And I see with every aspect, every tough, you know, right now, since the week before the Buffalo shootout here in America, where many people were killed, Mars went into Aries, which it does every 2 years. It's roughly a 2-year cycle. And it went into Aries, its own sign. And I think of Aries as the ready, fire, aim. You know, you know, it's impulse control problems. It's just move it, action. But it's can be very macho, Mars in Aries. And it's conjunct Jupiter, which is also in Aries. Now, Jupiter takes 12 years around the zodiac. So they only come together in Aries, which is Mars's own sign, every, you know, it's been, I think, 1975, 2 or 3 times a decade. Yeah, 1904, 1940, 1975, and now. And so it's not often that they come together. And you have Jupiter is bigger than, as a planet, bigger than all the other planets put together. And it expands whatever it touches. So right now, and that can be lovely if it's your luck that it's expanding. It can be tricky when it crosses your ascendant and it's your waistline that expands. And here it's expanding Mars. And Mars, so right now, that's very feisty energy. And we have had one awful shootout after the other here in America. Mass shootings. There's also amazing heroism in the men fighting the fires, the forest fires. That's like the best of Mars. You know, on a good day,
Mhm.
Mars is our inner immune system. It's our ability to say yes and no, our passion and our boundaries, and our ability to rescue, you know, and to boldly go where we have not gone before, to go exploring that wonderful Mars energy. So you put Jupiter and Mars together, and there's lots of Mars. And one way of expressing it has been, you know, right now, if people get mad, they tend to go from 0 to 90 and like bam. But you have the energy to do wonderful ritual, or to laugh, or to work out, or to, you know, fix something. I have a neighbor building a wall that suddenly just, I feel like building a wall. And you know, using Mars on a positive way means there's less buildup to come out in a negative way. And it's when those become shadow elements and we don't have
Mhm.
a place to go with them. So, you know, I'm asking people right now, while Mars and Jupiter are conjunct, if they know that and they feel themselves reacting to something, go take a walk. Walk around the house. Just take a deep breath, get outside, you know, chop some firewood if you've got it, and then come back to the problem when the fire is calmed down a little bit. And you're using that Mars to chop firewood, but you're also not chopping anybody's head off while you're calming down that process. And that's why I've written this article for 30 years. It also helps me know where the planets are when I'm dealing with a client. So I do readings all the time, and I do that on Zoom, and I can do that, and it helps to know where all the planets are, and I know that because I've been doing the article. So it helps me,
Wow.
helps with the transits easier.
Blake says, I hear that we're heading into a rare Saturn retrograde. I believe it is. Any general comments there for us?
Well, Saturn just turned retrograde. Last weekend, Mercury turned direct and Saturn turned retrograde. Like bam, bam. And Saturn actually retrogrades most every year. And many planets all line up in the summer to retrograde. And you know, retrograde for Mercury is the one that moves so fast. It goes around the sun 3 times a year. So 3 times a year, it looks like it's backing up relationship to the planets behind it. And all that pattern, all those planets mean when they retrograde is they go back over, it appears from our earthly perspective that they are backing up against the zodiac because of where they are in the orbit
Mhm.
and their relationship to our orbit and theirs. So Saturn retrograde, any retrograde planet tends to review what it's been. Mercury is the planet of movement, so that has the most difficulty when it goes direct because Mercury likes to move and Mercury retrograde doesn't like to move. So here we are stuck spinning our wheels. I think that and Mercury is most difficult when it's stationary, like the times when it's turning retrograde and when it's turning direct. Saturn retrograde, I just had a hummingbird come by the window. How nice.
Oh, lovely.
Saturn retrograde is, you know, asking us to look at, you know, in America, when Saturn turned retrograde, we started talking about gun restrictions. How do we be the adult in the room? Because Saturn talks about, you know, Saturn rules what we don't have as a baby: bones, teeth, and personal authority. It's what we grow over time and through tradition and through experience, what we grow into. And the first Saturn cycle, when we're the first 30 years, it's still something other people have, and then we grow our own Saturn. So it's our discipline, our thoughts, our authority that we're working with, and then we move into layers with that. But so Saturn retrograde asks us to look at our relationship to authority, ours and others. How can restrictions feed us rather than cause us, free us? Because they, you know, a restriction here, gun control, will save a lot of people, we
Mhm.
think. But in all of our lives, our personal disciplines, not what other people necessarily put on us, but our personal disciplines can give us what we need to grow. I think of it like your spine, which is ruled by Saturn. You can only get as big, you know, I can't get any taller than my spine, but my spine is what gives me, my muscles, something to push off on and have strength. So that's you know, I think of the role of Saturn in that. So Saturn retrograde, you know, we're asking questions about personal, our inner parent. How's our inner parent voice? What's our relationship to our parents and that internal voice? What's relationship to authority, ours and others? How's our teeth doing? How's our back doing? Do we want to look at our routines and our rituals and our traditions, and are they working for us? Do we need to reconnect with our rituals? Do we need to say, that doesn't work for me and I need to reinvent a ritual? How to really look at all of our Saturn principles while Saturn's retrograde.
Wow.
And it's retrograde until October.
Until October. Now, I don't know if this, Carmen is this question, I don't know if that relates to Saturn retrograde. Does this aspect mean that the war in Ukraine will go on for a long time?
Not necessarily. There are plenty of other things that do that. Saturn retrograde, I think the Mars-Jupiter conjunction, I didn't expect to see any lack of...
Oh, sorry, she's referring to that, the Mars-Jupiter in Aries.
Mars-Jupiter in Aries. That's going to be moving on in a few weeks. Jupiter will be in Aries. It's about to turn retrograde. It'll go back into Pisces. Then in the fall, go back into Aries. It spends roughly a year in a sign, but this time it's sort of bunny hopping between the two of them before it goes on. Mars is only in a sign for usually a few months. Once in a while, if it goes retrograde, it'll be up to 4 or 5 months, but it's only a few months. So it certainly says that right now the fire is up. I would be very surprised if there was a peace treaty signed this month.
Okay.
Two of them will begin to pull away and not be as conjunct by mid-June. We're already past the peak. And by mid-June, they'll both be in Aries, but they won't be conjunct. When I look at Putin's chart, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. Okay. Unfortunately. I wish. I would love to be wrong.
Yeah. Someone has a question. Why is Saturn referred to as the witch's planet?
The witch's planet. Well, the Saturn, again, it's history, tradition, the old ways. Sometimes Saturn was seen as the crone. It's seen, and some people see it as the patriarch. Some people see it as the crone. That's why I call it the parent within.
Okay.
So it's, and so I don't necessarily think of it as the witch's planet. I think, the planets are the witch's planet, but your connection to the old ways, to traditions, and to your personal authority and how you want to work with it, and rituals, and has a lot to do with Saturn.
Okay. Jules has a question. Your oracle cards are awesome. Did you create them?
Did I create them?
Or did you vision them? I
these cards. I worked with a wonderful tattoo artist in Melbourne, or my Hay House publishers helped me find, and I said, this is my vision. I see these cards with working with and they did so much more detailed work than I could have imagined. But I visualized each card as what the symbol was that I wanted here, what the range was, what I wanted, and what were the specific attributes for each planet that I wanted represented in the cards, or each symbol. I love Gemini as the cross-pollinating bees.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah.
And they'll have on it somewhere down here the symbol for air, alchemical symbol for air, a little sign of Mercury in the center. And there's a lot of hidden symbolism in each of those. And I listed what I want, the color tone, the feeling that I wanted on the card. And then I got out of the way and let the wonderful artist, he's Brazilian, living in Melbourne, Lucas Lua de Souza did the artwork.
Wow, that's incredible. Blake says, to be a tattoo artist, you must first be an amazing artist. I'm an ink fan, and now that you say it, I can see the influence on the card art. Love it. So great.
Wonderful. I have. I got one of the patterns tattooed on my upper arm as as a present to myself. And so that that they were designed more to just be something that would grab people and have them relate to it, not as something distant or that would get a range of people connected to them. That was my hope.
Oh, absolutely wonderful. Where do you get your awen and your imas for your creativity for doing, designing cards like that?
As I talk to the cards, I talk to the symbols, and I'm trying to work on a book that will take this same approach to all of astrology and get it out. And I do get stuck sometimes, but I've been working with the cards for a very long time. My family joke was I was raised by a mathematician and a psychiatric nurse, and you put them in a blender, you get an astrologer, right? But it was that if you get, but that I learned, but it felt like I was remembering it this lifetime.
Okay.
I'm not very good at a lot of things. I didn't learn how to drive a car until I was 35. This felt like I was remembering.
Okay.
I'm slightly numerically dyslexic, but I can read a chart upside down and sideways because
Wow.
I can read it three-dimensionally. So it's like some very specific ways my brain works, but mainly when in doubt, I talk to like Venus. What do you want to say? Chiron. What would you like them to know? And get them to speak for me. I can really get stuck with that on the writing the article because that's been a discipline every week that I have to put this out, and I have to kind of get all the planets up. I think of it like do you remember how they used to spin plates on
Yeah,
little,
yeah.
and you had to kind of get everybody moving and they're all spinning. So I have to kind of imagine what they all are, and then say, so what are you going to make? How can what words do you have for me? And I think that's the conversation that I love in OBOD. You are conversing with the tree and listening to the tree. If you get stuck, you take a walk and say, okay, natural world, how do I handle this? And they give you a symbol that this, that our relationship is a conversation with the natural world.
I think that's so important that the conversation with the natural world, and that's how so much can come to us, is by having that conversation.
I think it can be really helpful. And so many of the journeys in the OBOD training help you go, I don't know the answer to this. Well, they take you on a journey and you go speak to an archetype or an animal or a tree or a rock or a place that does know. And sure enough, the entrance is in you. What a surprise. Who knew? And then you find it and you start to build that aperture over time. And I think that that's the part of the process that I really love.
And do you get that sitting in front of your computer, or is it in a special room in your house, or are you out looking at you're now admiring the mountains rather than wanting to climb them? Or where are you when you get this?
When I take when I'm writing my article,
Yeah, when you're
I'm
getting
sitting right here looking at the trees. I have trees. I have a beautiful old rowan tree that's teaching me about aging in front of my house, and I'm seeing the trees. If I get stuck, I take a walk.
Okay.
And I'll stumble, and I will find out how that stumbling. Because if you start seeing the world, I started doing divination walks when I was living in New Mexico. A friend of mine who said he was a therapist who would take people hiking. He would do hikotherapy, he called it, hikotherapy. And they would, you go out with a problem and you ask, help me understand this. I do a divination walk usually on my birthday every year. What symbols do I need for this year ahead? And I'll see a lizard with a forked tail, or I'll, the snake year and the bat year were heavy. But normally it's something a lot more subtle in the interaction. And I honor that. And I honor the times that animals have spoken to me. And the coyote that stopped me in the middle of the road and wouldn't let me go by when my mother was dying. And I didn't know that. I just went home instead. I said, Coyote, what is your problem? Beep, can you get out of the way? And it just stared at me. And I said, something unexpected is about to happen. And I kept asking, like, what I should go home and clear my schedule. And then the coyote ducked its head and walked off. So I went, well, okay, better listen. I went home and cleared my schedule, and I got the call to get on the next plane and get home.
Wow.
And then the airport was closed with a tornado, with a snowstorm. If I hadn't been on that plane,
you wouldn't have gotten out. Okay.
I wouldn't have gotten there. So, that was, thank you, Coyote. But the idea, and I started doing this when I lived in New York City, just walking into the art museum. Okay, feet, show me a symbol that I need to handle this experience. And if you're used to using any form of divination, tarot cards, the Ogham, you kind of like, what does that symbol, let that help me think about things in a way I wouldn't normally. And just that taking you out of your normal way of thinking and giving you an archetype to work with starts opening up places that you wouldn't have thought. And so I'll often, if I'm stuck in my writing and I will take a walk and see if the natural world tells me anything. Sometimes it just sort of clarifies my head, and I just clears my head. Sometimes something will happen around me to help to remind me of what I need to know.
Wow. Yeah, Pat says, okay, feet thing is very likely body dowsing when you use your whole body as a divining rod. Yeah. And Anne says, I do that too. Go walking to find out what I'm really feeling or searching for. And always doing after an OBOD lesson. It has become an essential part of learning and such a blessing.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Say has been your greatest achievement. I mean, you have many. So I'm interested in...
My greatest achievement?
Yeah, what you're most proud of.
Staying alive. I think I don't, what's pride? I really wanted to write some books, and there's 2 children's books I wrote for my grandkids, Tallulah Bear Goes Exploring and Tallulah Bear's Bedtime Book, which are also very dear to my heart. So I'm glad I finally got those done. I didn't publish a book until I hit 60.
Wow.
So I finally got to that. Raising my kids. I've chosen not to be super aggressive about being an astrologer. I'm not on the circuit. I'm not touring, not because I love teaching, but I don't have the politics of it and trying to get out there and do that. So there's part of me that wishes I had done more of that, but also is very glad I didn't and just wants to be there for my clients. When I have a good connection with a client and our work can be helpful to them, I think that's what I'm most proud of.
Lovely.
But I've seen a lot of family members through some very tough times. My son, my mother with Alzheimer's, my father, my in-laws, and we buried 5 planets after we married. 5 parents, not planets, 5 parents over the first 10 years of our marriage.
Wow.
And all of that work, gave me, each time you're learning something which you bring back to your work, you bring back to your clients. But I think just feeling like I did my best during that time. I've overscheduled myself this year and not been able to do some of the things I'd hoped to do, and I feel bad about that. But post-COVID, I've just had to really crank down how much I do and be careful. And so I would like to clean that up a little bit so I'm more comfortable. But just accepting that I can't do everything and to do what I do best as I can. That I'm proud of.
Wow. My next question is, what's the most reckless thing you've done?
Reckless thing? At what time in my life? In what category? I had some pretty wild times. As I ran away from home at 15.
Wow.
I, was in the middle of the May Day demonstrations back when we were trying to shut down and during the Vietnam War. I jumped out of a car at gunpoint when I was hitchhiking and I was 15. Then I sort of had a nervous breakdown because that was really scary. And I realized, what did my anger to the world that I was running away from home and being so political, what it looked like coming back at me? That was tricky. So learning to let that go, I would say that wasn't a smart and sensible time in my life, my adolescence. Since then, moving to North Dakota with a transitioning partner was, I wouldn't say reckless, but I felt very brave. It was,
Yeah, yeah.
I, I felt like, well, okay, now let's do that, I guess. So I felt brave about that. I've gone, head to head with school systems for my son with his learning disabilities, and grizzly bears had nothing on a mom who needs to make sure that's right. And I know every mother out there knows that feeling. So I would say those are some of the more brave moments that I've had.
Wow, brilliant. So, what are you most grateful for?
That I've made it. I'm very grateful for a spiritual path that feels integrating, and for the OBOD community all around the globe that I just feels like my people. It feels so good. Uh, a couple of years ago, we had at Paganicon in
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota. I was on a panel with, Dave the Bard and Chris and Carrie and just like, oh, they're just such wonderful people, and we had so much great ideas going back and forth. And we had a packed, several hundred people in the audience that day. They were fascinated by OBOD. So finding this crew, I am so grateful to be living in wilderness. I live,
Mm.
to having a chance to take some part. We live on the edge of wilderness, and this area had been 50 years ago a gravel pit, part of it. And we've been rewilding it and really encouraging the wild to take some of it back. Down the hill, we live at the top of the hill, so down the hill was the gravel pit. And helping it come back alive.
Wonderful.
They had a lot of animals on this land before us, and so it's taken a lot to help it reconnect. So I'm very grateful for that. I'm grateful for the good people in my life and the healing that's happened in my family over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Very grateful for that.
Oh, that's wonderful. When you think of the world, I mean, we've talked about a number of things. One concern you have about the world today?
Well, and I want to add to that, I am grateful for doing work that I love. I think that's enormous. So back to what I'm most worried about the world. There is no doubt that the ecosystem is my biggest concern.
Yeah.
And everything else we've got time for. Evolution doesn't run in a straight path. If we look back over time, one of the interesting things I've done in astrological research has been going back and seeing when was the last time these major aspects happened for the last 5,000 years. And to see the repeating patterns and to see the cycles. We've made it through so many things. We forget how much we've already made it through until we get and that helps us take. I see a lot of people go like, oh my God, this is happening. I go like, yeah, it happened this time. We lived. How can we use it well? But, the ecosystem is the one thing we don't have time for. And, America's going through some very tricky transits to its natal chart right now. We're at our Pluto return. Pluto's back where it was when we were born. But that's when democracy was born in this country, and I'm hoping it will be reborn. And there are other aspects that are so edgy that that I worry about, but I know we can use those for good. The ecosystem and the long-term effects of the ecosystem. I know the Earth will right itself eventually.
Mm-hmm.
One of the more interesting lectures I attended once was an evolutionary biologist who would go back, and point out that when this happened and 3/4 of the species died, this 1/4 did an evolutionary leap. I said, yes, but it took a couple million years. In the big picture, always the leap is towards evolution. If we all die out and we lose all of our species, evolution will be miserable, and then it will leap forward again eventually in a couple million years. I'd rather not be responsible for that. I'd rather see all of our wonderful animals stay with us.
Mhm.
This is the first time it would be happening, the set off by humans, and I would hate to see that. That's my concern.
Oh, so absolutely. Do you have any hope, or what gives you hope?
A lot of hope. And
Okay.
that's what I see, one of the problems with looking at the ecosystem too carefully is that people get so depressed, it's very hard for them to act.
Yeah, yeah.
And I want to catch, and the minute I hear, and it's been so essential in my life, never stop at hopeless. I think having a child, special needs child, is like, I'm not taking no for an answer. There are, I don't know what the journey is, but it can be fascinating. So let's go. And that anything that if we can keep ourselves, let ourselves have the feeling, but avoid thinking about the future when you're miserable.
Okay.
Be miserable. Express it. You're in the basement. You're crying. It's horrible. You're mourning. That's not a place to decide or to make decisions about. You can't say it's going to be terrible because you don't know.
Yeah.
And if there's a way through, we have to believe that we can look for it and find it. If there's a way to help the ecosystem, being miserably depressed won't help us find it. So there are these little moments and little spots of heat and little moments of excitement that are just beginning to stir. And as we begin to break our Neptunian addiction to fossil fuels, I think we're opening up so many possibilities. And many other places are trying that besides, and it's happening in strange corners. And I think that will, that there is a way through that I can't begin to imagine, but I can feel it. Now we have to find it.
It's nice to have hope in this time. It's. I think when we get into that place of hopeless, then we become helpless,
Right.
and we need to hold on to that all of the time. Yeah, Gabriella says, I think the ecosystem will be fine with or without humans. It would be nice that we could do something before. Yeah, I do believe everything will survive. Sorry, the Earth will survive.
Survive, right.
And maybe that little 25% of.
Right. And we hope that we can, that we can skip that, we are losing species after species. And any species that we can, any bit of diversity, that's in human, because it ties back to our talk on trans people. We need, and that's one of the things that Ren would point out about most native tribes, is they needed every single person to make it through the winter. And they needed whatever skills you brought. So they had to accept diversity and assume that there was one of everything that we needed.
Yeah, yeah.
And that, I remember one, Schleim, I think was his name. I forget the name of the book, but he talks about how 1 in every 10 people is left-handed, 1 in every 10 people is gay, 1 in every 10 people is roughly is colorblind, and that all of those, that we needed that one extra person in that, and the hunting bands are about 10 people. Yeah. So that you needed a little bit of, like someone who saw pattern, not color. You needed someone who could throw that way when you were throwing that way. You needed one extra adult that wasn't having kids so they could help the band, make it work. And that all of the more diversity we bring, we know that from the ecosystem. The more diversity in the ecosystem, the more sturdy the environment is to handle changes you know, they get it, everything migrates around a little and adapts rather than just dies. And that humans, I think, the more diversity we can bring to a group, the more diversity we can bring to a community, the more versatile it is and robust and healthy, and just like the ecosystem. So I'm hoping that we can bring a huge variety of ideas to the plate to solve this problem.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. We're coming to the end of our time, and it's been an absolutely wonderful conversation. But just to read a few more comments, Indra says, you manifest the capacity of Divine Mother to embrace, accept, and dance with all. Also entertain interfaith traditions as you practice. Brava. Your words illuminating today. Personally helpful, and thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Isn't that lovely?
I'm so glad. And you know, I'm so glad to see our my Shining Mountains Grove. Our Shining Mountains is the name of our grove because it's, and the OBOD Stone Keepers, which are our little groups. But we are, I think both Brenda and I are happy to talk to other OBODs if we can be helpful out here in the West or through the Stone Circles. And if anybody wants to contact me about gender issues and get some support, I would be happy to be there for you.
And that can be on rowanrobbins.com. There's a contact there. Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you so much for your generosity. I think that'll be really, really helpful for people. So Pat has to be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing. Raymond Williams. I think that is so important.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I like that quote.
Yeah, I think it's just beautiful.
And
and Gabriella says, yet Guy seems to like creation so that 10 beings troop may be different in the future than it was a few thousand years ago or hundreds of years ago, still diverse, but different. But of course, we'll only survive through diversity. That's, you know, when even organizations talk about, you know, what do you need to make a team work? You need all of these different skills. Like neurodiversity, skill diversity, you name it. It is also so important. So we have to just allow that. And having, we talk about having that respectful curiosity, being interested in people's stories. You can learn so much more from each other.
And how to, you know, we talk about respectful curiosity. Then how do you talk to someone who is gender odd and say, tell me about yourself? And, you know, help me understand what, you know, what language do you like? You know, all of those good questions that I find that OBOD people are impertinently curious, and that's wonderful. That it's a respectful curiosity. I'm curious about you, and not suspicious of you. I'm curious about you, and that curiosity that you can stay in your own tradition and be curious about other people's traditions as respectful equals without feeling like you have to uncenter from your own tradition. And I think that's.
I think you hit something there. I think often people fail with differences that if you're going to talk about your difference, then you're telling me that mine's wrong and I have to change. And it's not about that. It's about let's hear. It's like
how huge divinity is.
That's right. A potluck feast. People bring food and you choose and you taste a little bit and you think, don't like that, but I do like this. And I might have another bit of that. And that's what it is. And it's about sharing all of that. So Gabriella says, I absolutely love this fireside chat. It's been tremendously insightful and wonderfully educational. Thank you both. What a wonderful conversation. That's from Mangala. And then Dixie says, the greater the diversity, the greater the knowledge and skills pool is. Absolutely. Very inspiring talk again. Thank you. And Ferdiad, whoops, I'd say he's just gone off the screen. Well, actually, Amanda says, curiosity and imagination is the key to evolution. And Ferdiad, such a beautiful talk this evening. You are filled with grace and wisdom, and it's an honor to listen to you talk. I agree, Ferdiad.
Thank you so much, Eimear. It's wonderful. wonderful to share this. And you're so fresh back from Glastonbury. You must be exhausted. The
Well, I
pictures
was
of
before I
this look
started.
fabulous.
Well, yeah, I'm energized by the chat, but I was exhausted when I came on. But I hope I really sleep well tonight. It was such a good weekend and meeting so many people, and to be, you know, within people. They hadn't been to Glastonbury before. This was for some. It was their first gathering, but just being in a room of very diverse people, but also a meeting of like minds, like souls, and it was wonderful. The goodwill was amazing, it was just incredible. So I really, really enjoyed it, and it was very nurturing. And I hope the rest of the people, I mean, some of the people here on the watching tonight were there also, and it was great to meet them. So Gabriella, whom she came up to me and said that she's often the one who, oh, my last question, and maybe Gabriella, I don't know if you're going to predict what Heather's favorite season or festival of the year. Gabriella used to lay bets, and she came up to me in Glasgow, which was really sweet of her. So what is your favorite season, and what is your favorite ceremony to mark the Wheel of the Year?
What's not to love about all of them? I would say the fall is probably my favorite season, but I'm sorry, I love all three, all of them. And favorite ceremony, I love Imbolc. I love the cross-quarter days. I think that I honor the astrological seasons tremendously, but the cross-quarter days take me into other places. So I would have to say I'll go for the cross-quarter days rather than the equinox and the solstice, oddly enough, for an astrologer.
Okay, and Gabriella reckoned midsummer, but no, so it's cross quarters. Listen, Heather, it's been such an absolute joy chatting to you. Absolutely, it has been a wonderful evening, and I know from the comments, Ricky says an enchanting conversation. You know, it's just thank you, ladies, for all your love. You're healing me. This is from Ian. So it's always a fascination about these conversations. We never know who's going to be there, and we never know what path my guest is going to go down. It's been just a very enriching conversation. So you can say good night to everybody, and then I will say good night.
Good night. Take care.
Oh, your daytime. Sorry, you can say good afternoon. Sorry.
Good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Oh, so listen, thank you all very, very much. And I look forward to seeing you next week. So until then, be well and slán go fóill.